Well, this week we're still walking with Walt.
Okay.
I think this is the last of the walking with Walt's, though.
I hope so, because my feet are killing me.
Yeah, we just wore our feet out at
Disneyland.
Disneyland.
We've been home for a while.
But there's a bunch more little railroads around Disneyland, and we thought we'd just sort of lump those all together into one video about a whole bunch of little railroads, some of which are really fascinating, because Walt was looking for an excuse to stick a railroad pretty much anywhere. Well, not there, but he was... well, we'll edit that out. Anyway, so the other railroads of Disneyland, check this out. So for our fourth Walking with Walt, we're going to be looking at 4 of the little small railroads around Disneyland, starting with the Main Street horse cars.
I love those.
Isn't that neat? These old style trolleys. This kind of system has been around forever. And what they're doing here is they're actually putting one of the horses and carts away. The way you have to do that is unhook the horse from one end of the trolley, move him around to the other end. That takes the trolley back in the direction it came from. And just past here, there's a spring switch, and that will move the horse trolley down the alley behind the fire station and behind City Hall here, which is where the stables are for the horses and storage for the trolleys, right behind Walt's apartment.
Yes.
Actually, right next to the Jungle River Cruise.
Oh, how about that?
Walt's grandkids used to walk down there and go swimming in the river cruise.
How lucky.
Yeah, I wonder, because they didn't have swimming suits, so I've always kind of wondered, but kids will figure things out.
Cut-offs.
Yeah,
shorts.
Cut-offs, I'm sure. So Walt wanted to have these horse-drawn trolleys on Main Street, that and some antique vehicles.
Oh, look at that one.
Isn't that neat? Now, in '55, these were real live antique vehicles. Ward Kimball brought in a fire truck and so on. But try to keep something from 1905 up and running.
Yeah, a little bit difficult.
So in 1958, they built all this stuff from scratch. And these were all built in 1958. They've been running on Main Street ever since. Real easy to maintain. The horse-drawn trolleys, of course, were there on opening day in 1955. And they run up the middle of Main Street. They've got a reversing loop at either end of Main Street, so they don't have to ever turn anything around. They just always go in the same direction. And they're set up with spring switches so that they can pass each other on the passing track or go through the reversing loops. Never requires throwing a switch or doing anything. They just go. It's really hard to even imagine Main Street without these trolleys.
They're so whimsical.
It's great, and the whole of Main Street is supposed to feel like a Midwestern American town, and these things are just such an integral part of the look and feel of Main Street, the sound of the clanging bells and so on. It just wouldn't be Main Street without them. Interestingly, to keep this Midwestern looking, it looks like brick, but it's not.
I've heard it's stucco.
It's actually stucco. These were all movie set builders, and they knew how to make things look a certain way. So the brick pattern is just embossed into the stucco, and then it's all hand-painted to look like brick.
That's awesome.
And because they're filmmakers, they wanted credits, so the names on the windows here are the people who designed Disneyland. That, and of course, there's always been corporate sponsorship here as well. Now, across the way at California Adventure, they have their version of Main Street, and they have their version of the horse-drawn trolleys. The Main Street here was intended to represent Los Angeles in the golden era.
Yes.
The 1930s.
They do a great job, and I even found Wilshire Boulevard complete with Santa Claus flying over it.
Isn't that neat?
That's fun.
If you know your way around Los Angeles, every one of these little scenes, you go, oh, I recognize that. Just a whole composite of Los Angeles. And in the 1930s, they had the red car.
Yes.
It was torn out after World War II, tragically. But these are 5/8 scale models of the red car trolleys that used to run all over Los Angeles.
They look just like the ones from Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, because Roger Rabbit takes place in Los Angeles in the 1930s. And so they're riding around on red cars. Incidentally, the actual red car that they used for that movie is out at the Orange Empire Railroad Museum in Paris, California, which is also where Ward Kimball's locomotives and passenger cars have been taken. So it's a really great place to go looking for Disney memorabilia, the Orange Empire Museum.
I really love riding trolleys.
It's relaxing. We've had a lot of fun riding trolleys in cities all over the place.
We sure have.
Remember Fort Collins?
Absolutely. And San Francisco.
Oh, San Francisco. And it's just fun. Get on a trolley and just sort of kick back and let the world go by.
Right.
And about this time, our feet were killing us at Disney.
Oh, no kidding.
Good grief. And to be able to get on a trolley and just ride it to the exit, it actually serves its purpose as a transportation system at that point, and boy did it save our feet. So in 1955, if you mentioned Disneyland, this is what most people thought about, was Fantasyland.
Yes.
In some ways, this is just like walking into a Disney cartoon.
It sure is.
And so everybody wanted to do Fantasyland more than any other part of Disneyland. Fantasyland is really well known for its dark rides. This is Alice in Wonderland, which actually didn't open until '58. But they started on it in '55. They just didn't have the money to build all this stuff. And so on opening day, only one of these dark rides, this one, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, was actually finished. The others were incomplete. The castle, of course, was complete. And right here is the oldest ride in the park, the carousel.
My favorite.
You know, Disney sort of started this whole thing because he wanted to have a merry-go-round. And he purchased this, and so it is the only original amusement park ride anywhere in the park, and therefore the oldest ride in the park.
And the coolest.
And the coolest. And right next to the carousel was one of the more famous rides created just for Disneyland, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Now you can see it's right next to the merry-go-round. It isn't there anymore. It got moved to a location about 300 feet from there, and it had to be completely rebuilt with larger, more stable cars and that sort of thing. The original one from 1955 was the first amusement park ride I ever threw up on. So I have fond memories of that, I guess.
It's a good thing they're teacups then, right?
Yeah, oh boy. But we didn't throw up when we went on it this time. We just had fun. In the location where the tea party used to be is the recreated Dumbo the Flying Elephant. This too was completely rebuilt with larger cars. One of the original Dumbos hangs here in the employee cafeteria. And, of course, Fantasyland has to have its own train because it's Disney and his friends. You got to stick a train everywhere you possibly can. This is the original train station designed by the art department, but they wanted Ward Kimball to design the locomotive because he just had an eye for that sort of thing. And he figured since Walt Disney loved the Ole Mana of the two little plantation engines that he had on his railroad, he would make it look like the Ole Mana because Disney had told him if Mickey Mouse ever had his own locomotive, it would look just like the Ole Mana. So that was the principal inspiration for the Casey Jones Jr., with just a hint of the Chloe thrown in, and maybe a little of his other creation, Jiminy Cricket, just to give it a little character. But it's pretty easy to see the DNA of its parent here, the Ole Mana plantation locomotive. This one had a tendency to derail, so they redesigned the track and wheel flanges slightly. Now the Casey Jr. runs around Storybook Land, and the other way to see Storybook Land is on the Storybook Land Canal Boats. 2 rides in one area, and you can only see Storybook Land on one of these 2 rides. The whole idea behind Storybook Land was to create a miniature garden in about 1/20th scale depicting scenes from various fairy tales and principally Disney's animated films. And these scenes could be added to over time to help promote their new animations. And that's exactly what Storybook Land is even to this day. The Casey Jr. depicts a circus train from a Disney cartoon, The Little Engine That Could. So the other way to get around Storybook Land is on the Canal Boats. We're starting on the journey here by being swallowed by Monstro the whale from the Disney film Pinocchio. If you remember, in the film, Pinocchio was swallowed by Monstro.
And in the story, The Little Engine That Could, he's confronted by a steep hill. And he thinks he can, and he did.
Unfortunately, with the original ride, about here he would typically derail, so I guess that means he actually couldn't. But they got that problem resolved.
And here is Disneyland's other castle, the Cinderella Castle.
Done in about a 1/20th scale like the rest of the gardens. The gardens were no mean feat. Originally it was like, well, let's just build a miniature garden. The Japanese do that with their bonsai. Oh, they had no idea what they were getting themselves into. Took many, many, many months of study and hiring specialized gardeners and so on to create these little miniaturized gardens. But keep in mind, all of these trees in here are around 60 years old, and they're only a few inches tall. And of course, a whole bunch of little miniature structures had to be added to that. And as a kid, I went, oh man, I'd love to have a miniature railroad in my yard in about this size.
Yes, and we can still do that.
Yes, at Garage Mahal. And we're going to do that, and it's going to be really exciting. Garden railroading really took off in the 1970s after Lehman Grossbahn came out with a bunch of trains in these sizes, and that just launched a whole new type of hobby. Oh, the little park on our right is from Peter Pan. That's where Peter Pan and the kids would rendezvous before flying off on their adventures. You can certainly see the gardens from the train ride, but if you really want to appreciate them, you have to go on the boat ride, because then you can get right down next to the plants and structures. But that doesn't mean the train isn't a ball.
Oh, that's always fun.
Who would pass up riding a train? And through a little miniature garden like this, it's just awesome. And just about every time you visit Disneyland, you're going to find that this area has been changed ever so slightly. Because when they release new films, they tend to add a new area, like Prince Eric's castle here from The Little Mermaid. This is Toad Hall from Wind in the Willows. Over here we have the village from Aladdin. So some of this stuff was here originally, most of it's been added. But perhaps the most original thing here is Casey Jr Circus Train from 1955.
And it's just darn cute.
And it does look a lot like the Olimana. And speaking of the Olimana, check this out. This railroad is no longer here at Disneyland, but look at that. It's essentially the same locomotive. This was Nature's Wonderland Railroad, and here again it's based on Ward Kimball's little plantation engines, principally the Olimana. The little locomotive was not steam-powered. It had a gasoline engine in it, but it sure looked like it was steam-powered. It ran through Nature's Wonderland, and in 1955, well, they just didn't have the budget to lay all the track, so for the first year, you went through this area in a Wells Fargo stagecoach.
How fun!
But in 1956, you could start riding through here in your own little train. Doesn't that look like the Grizzly Flats Railroad?
It does.
Even the little cars here are based on the open-air cars from Ward Kimball's Grizzly Flats Railroad. It had two really neat trestles, this one over a beaver pond, the other one over an area called Bear Country. These were the balancing rocks, and a couple of them were motorized, so they'd start to tip over on you and scare the crap out of you. And this was, I think, the coolest place on the railroad, Rainbow Ridge, where you got on and off the ride. Doesn't that look like Steve's railroad?
It sure does.
Boy, I swear he copied this little area, but it is so cool. This is what it looks like today. They've changed it up a bit because they changed the whole ride around. They turned it into the Big Thunder Mountain Railway some years ago. Has the same look and feel of the original Nature's Wonderland. The trains look quite similar. The cars look quite similar. The difference is this one just goes a lot faster.
Oh my.
So gee, keep your hands and legs inside the ride at all times. It doesn't require a whole lot of looking around to find bits and pieces of the original railroad. The tunnels are all still in, but as you can see, the trestles were removed, which is really pretty sad because they were amazing. These tunnels lead through to the other side of the hill over by the Rivers of America, and over here all of the tracks are still in. They've been intentionally damaged so that they look like old abandoned railroad tracks. And for a number of years, the locomotive was set here and left to just sort of intentionally rot away. Fortunately, it was taken to the LA Live steamers in Griffith Park, and they have completely restored it. But the Imagineers are still having a lot of fun with this area, coming up with all kinds of fun things, like this mine shaft and walking beam engine. Fun piece of Disney lore, there used to be a place here called Casa de Fritos, a little eatery, and they were throwing away a lot of stale tortillas, and so someone suggested the idea of frying those and turning them into tortilla chips. You know them today as Doritos. Well, there you go. That was a lot of little railroads.
Yeah.
And they're just all over. I really miss the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train.
Aww.
I loved that ride, but Thunder Mountain, I wouldn't want to see that go away.
No.
So, you can't have everything, I guess.
They could try.
If you had everything, where would you keep it? Which brings us to the other subject, the collector's
Yes. We're there.
Because we've run into that problem that the more stuff you buy, the more space you need. At any rate, that's...
And then
And they've run into that problem at Disneyland, that the only way they can build new rides is to tear old rides down, even if they're really, really neat little railroads like the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, do pop on over to the channel. And if you haven't subscribed, you want to subscribe. And the easy way to subscribe is to click on the blue button, zoink, right here, blue button. Now, if you're not seeing it, maybe you need glasses, or maybe your device doesn't support it, which could probably be the case, Anyway, blue button right there. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here again next week with some more massive screwing around. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.